Philozoopia.
Have you ever really stopped to think about what gives something its worth, like a commodity?
Or even why a piece of paper or, just numbers on a screen can function as money.
Exactly.
Right.
These aren't just like academic questions. They really shape how we understand work and wealth and power every day.
Mm-hmm.
Today we're getting into some surprisingly relevant foundational ideas from political economy.
We're looking specifically at Karl Marx's Capital, Volume 1. It's one of the most influential texts ever, right? But also often misunderstood.
Definitely. And for this deep dive, our sources are direct excerpts from Capital itself. That includes Marx's own afterwards, and also prefaces by Engels, his collaborator.
Yeah, we're going straight to the source.
Our mission really is to unpack these arguments. They can be dense, absolutely, but they're full of these incredible insights.
The goal is to pull out those core ideas, the nuggets of knowledge that kind of shine a light on how our economy works behind the scenes.
Hopefully giving you some aha moments so you walk away, well-informed, maybe with a fresh perspective on things you see every day.
Let's dig in.
Okay.
What's really fascinating here, I think, is how these concepts, written so long ago, actually lay the groundwork for understanding issues we still grapple with.
Right. Things we argue about today.
Yeah. And we're going to see how some things that feel completely natural to us now, well, they're actually the result of very specific historical changes, not just how things always were.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Marx kicks things off by saying every commodity, basically anything bought or sold, has two sides.
Two factors, yeah. Use value and value.
Use value sounds pretty straightforward. It's just what the thing is for, right? A coat keeps you warm, food fills you up, it's utility.
Exactly. It satisfies some human need or want because of its, physical properties. Simple enough.
But then there's value, and this is different.
Very different. It's much more abstract. It's not about whether you personally like this coat more than that one.
So it's not subjective preference.
No. This value is what allows completely different things like, say, a coat and a ton of iron to be exchanged for each other in the market. How can they be equivalent?
Okay, so if it's not utility and it's not personal opinion, what is this underlying value?
Marx argues it's determined by the human labor that went into making it.
Labor, okay.
But more specifically, it's the socially necessary labor time.
Socially necessary, meaning?
Meaning the average amount of time it takes to produce that commodity under the normal, typical conditions of production in a given society, with the average skill and intensity of labor at that time.
So not how long it took me, because I'm slow at knitting.
Right. It's the average, the socially standard amount of effort. It's a collective measure.
Okay, that makes sense. And this leads to another really key idea, the twofold character of labor.
This is crucial.
So on one hand, you have the actual specific type of work, like weaving creates cloth, carpentry makes a chair. That's concrete, useful labor.
And that concrete labor is what creates the use value, the physical useful thing, the coat, the chair.
But then there's this other aspect, abstract human labor. What exactly is that?
Think of it as just human effort in general, the expenditure of human muscle, nerves, brain power, regardless of the specific form it takes.
So like detaching the effort from the specific task.
Exactly. It's the common substance in all human work. And this abstract labor, Marx says, is what creates value, the thing that allows for exchange.
Ah, okay. So weaving and carpentry are different concrete labors producing different use values.
But they both represent an expenditure of abstract human labor, and that's what makes the cloth and the chair comparable in terms of value. They both contain, say, X hours of general human effort.
Okay, I think I'm getting that. But how does this abstract value, how does it actually appear? How do we see it?
It only really shows itself through exchange. When one commodity is traded for another, let's say 20 yards of linen are exchanged for 2 coats. In that moment, the value of the linen is expressed in the coats, and vice versa. They're shown to be equivalent in value.
But in a real market, you're not just trading linen for coats. There's everything.
Right. So you need something that can act as a universal measure, a common language of value. And that's where money comes in.
The universal equivalent.
Precisely. Historically, things like gold became money, not because gold has some magical intrinsic value beyond its use as, jewelry or fillings, but because all other commodities start expressing their value in terms of gold. It becomes the mirror reflecting everyone else's value.
So gold works because everything else is measurable against it. based on that underlying labor time.
Yes, because all commodities are, at their core, commensurable products of abstract human labor. And Marx points out the real difficulty isn't understanding that money is a commodity.
Right.
It's figuring out how and why a particular commodity, like gold, becomes money.
So just to nail this down,
Yeah.
money itself is a commodity. Its value is set by the labor needed to produce it, like mining and processing the gold.
Exactly right, just like any other commodity. And that allows it to do its two main jobs.
Sure.
First, acting as a measure of values, setting prices. This can even be ideal money, just putting a price tag on something before it's sold.
Like saying this car costs $20,000.
Right. And second, acting as a medium of circulation, the actual physical currency or digital equivalent that changes hands when you buy or sell things.
Okay, this all builds towards another really famous concept, the fetishism of commodities, which sounds mysterious.
It does, doesn't it? Marx uses it to describe what he sees as a kind of illusion or magic trick that happens in the market.
A trick. How so?
He argues that when we exchange commodities, the actual social relationships between the people who produce them get obscured.
Hidden.
Yeah. Instead of seeing a relationship between, say, the weaver and the tailor, it looks like a relationship between the linen and the coat. The social character of their labor appears as if it's an objective property of the things themselves.
So we treat the objects as if they have inherent value, forgetting the human work behind them.
Exactly. It creates this mystical veil, as he calls it. Think about money again. It appears to have its own power, its own intrinsic value.
Right, like the dollar bill itself is valuable.
We forget it's just representing the social labor that produced the goods it can buy. That's the fetishism, attributing social characteristics to inanimate objects and obscuring the human relations underneath.
Okay, that's a lot to chew on. Those are the building blocks. Use value, abstract labor, money, fetishism.
Foundational concepts, yeah.
So now with those in place, we can move into the engine room, so to speak, how the system actually produces surplus value.
Right. Moving from commodities in general to one very unique commodity.
Labor power.
Labor power. The ability to work. This is what the worker sells to the capitaler.
And its value, following the logic, is determined like any other commodity.
Yes. By the cost of its production and reproduction, which means
the cost of keeping the worker alive and able to work. Food, shelter, clothing, maybe education for the next generation of workers.
Essentially, yes. The value of the means of subsistence necessary for the laborer and their family.
Okay. And this leads to a really critical distinction, doesn't it, between necessary labor and surplus labor.
Absolutely crucial. This is where Marx identifies the source of profit.
So necessary labor, that's the part of the workday where the worker produces value equivalent to their own wage, enough to cover their subsistence.
Exactly. Let's say it takes 4 hours of work to produce the value needed to allow the worker's daily wage. That's the necessary labor time.
But the worker doesn't just work 4 hours.
Usually not. If the working day is, say, 10 hours, then the remaining 6 hours are surplus labor.
And during that surplus labor time,
the worker is still creating value, but they're not getting paid for it. That value, created during the unpaid surplus labor time, is what Marx calls surplus value.
And that is the source of the capitalist's profit.
From this perspective, yes, the sole source.
Okay, so if creating surplus value is the driving force, how do capitalists go about increasing it?
Marx identifies two main strategies: absolute surplus value and relative surplus value.
Let's take absolute first. How does that work?
It's the most straightforward way.
Yeah.
Simply make the working day longer.
Longer hours.
Yes. If necessary labor is fixed at, say, 4 hours, extending the workday from 10 hours to 12 hours doubles the surplus labor time from 6 hours to 8. More unpaid work, more surplus value.
And the source material, capital, gives some pretty brutal examples of this in practice during the Industrial Revolution.
Oh, absolutely horrifying examples. Take the lucifer match industry in England around the 1860s.
What was happening there?
Half the workers were children under 13 or young people under 18. Many were under 10, some as young as 6.
6 years old.
Yes, working 12, 14, 15 hours a day, often night labor, taking their meals in rooms thick with phosphorus fumes which caused horrible diseases like phossy jaw.
It sounds like something out of fit. Well, Marx himself said.
He said Dante would have found the worst horrors of his inferno surpassed in this manufacture. That gives you an idea.
And it wasn't just one industry. You mentioned bakers.
Yes, fierce competition led masters to, quote, get 18 hours work out of their men for 12 hours wages. And this pressure also apparently led to widespread adulteration of bread to cut costs.
Wow. And there's that tragic story of the milliner, Mary Ann Walkley.
A truly dreadful case documented at the time. She was 20 years old, working in a London dressmaking establishment in 1863.
What were her hours like?
During the busy season, the average was 16.5 hours a day, but it wasn't uncommon to work 30 hours straight without a break.
30 hours? How did they even stay awake?
The accounts say they were sustained by sherry, port, coffee. Marianne died after working 26.5 hours continuously in an overcrowded, poorly ventilated room with dozens of other young women.
And the official cause of death?
The coroner's jury ruled her death was accelerated by overwork. Direct link.
It's just staggering. And iron foundries.
Similar stories. Boys as young as 9 working 12-hour shifts, sometimes, quote, 2 days and 2 nights running.
2 days and nights.
Yes. There's an account of a 9-year-old, George Allensworth, who worked such shifts and had to sleep on the furnace floor because his home was 5 miles away. He couldn't make it back and forth.
And the owners, did they see this as a problem?
Well, when asked about night work for boys under 18, the steel manufacturers, Messrs. Naylor and Vickers, basically said, "We could not well do without lads under 18 working by night." Why? The objection would be the increase in the cost of production.
Profit over well-being, plain and simple.
They even stated, quite chillingly, moments are the elements of profit. Every second counted.
This intense exploitation, the push for absolute surplus value, obviously led to pushback. Struggles for shorter working days.
A huge, long struggle. You had things like the Factory Acts Extension Act and the Workshops Regulation Act in England in 1867.
But they weren't always effective.
Initially, they only covered certain industries like textiles, and employers found ways around them. Marx describes these complex relay systems designed to make it impossible to track any individual worker's hours.
Just constant reshuffling of workers.
Exactly, to obscure the total length of the workday for any one person.
But this fight was fundamental.
Absolutely. It connects directly to the big movements for the 10-hour day in England and later the 8-hour day campaigns in the U.S. and internationally. Workers saw limiting the workday as, quote, a preliminary condition without which all further attempts at improvement and emancipation must prove abortive. You couldn't achieve anything else without controlling your time.
What's also interesting is that some early experiments with shorter hours actually showed positive results for production.
Yes, that's fascinating. Marx cites the example of Robert Gardner, a factory owner, who voluntarily reduced hours from 12 to 11 in 1844.
And what happened?
He found he got the same amount of product for the same cost, and workers earned the same wages in 11 hours as they had in 12. Gardner attributed it to increased steady application and economy of time by the workers. They were less fatigued, more focused. It sort of challenged the simple equation that longer hours always equals more output.
Okay, so that's absolute surplus value stretching the workday. What about the other method, relative surplus value?
Relative surplus value works differently. Instead of making the whole day longer, you aim to shorten the necessary labor part of the existing workday.
The part where the worker earns their wage.
Right. If you can increase the productiveness of labor, make workers produce more goods in the same amount of time, then the value of the goods they need for subsistence goes down.
So if things get cheaper to make,
then the value of labor power itself falls. Less time is needed to produce the equivalent of the worker's wage.
meaning more of the existing workday becomes surplus labor time.
Exactly. If necessary labor drops from 4 hours to 3 hours in a 10-hour day, surplus labor jumps from 6 hours to 7 without extending the day at all.
And the main way to achieve this increase in productivity?
Machinery. Technology. That's the key driver of relative surplus value.
So here we have this paradox again. Machinery seems like progress, making life easier.
But within this system, Marx argues, its primary role becomes to increase the rate of exploitation by cheapening labor power and boosting surplus labor time.
What were the specific effects of machinery on workers, according to the analysis in Capital?
Several major ones. First, obviously, displacement. Machinery often dispenses with muscular power, meaning it allows employers to hire workers with less physical strength, specifically women and children.
Which does what to the labor market?
It floods the market with more potential workers, which tends to drive down the price of labor power, sometimes even below its actual value, its subsistence cost. And it replaces more expensive skilled male labor with cheaper, less skilled labor.
So de-skilling is another effect.
Definitely. Marx quotes Adam Smith, actually, on how performing a few simple, repetitive operations all day long can lead to mental degradation. Smith says the worker, quote, generally becomes as stupid and ignorant as it is possible for a human creature to become. Harsh words, but reflecting a concern about the impact of highly specialized, machine-driven labor.
Wow, okay, displacement, de-skilling.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Intensification. Machinery doesn't just enable longer hours, it also drives workers harder during those hours.
So?
By setting the pace. Workers have to keep up with the machine, tend more machines, work at greater speeds. It's about extracting more effort in the same amount of time.
Now, there was an argument back then, the theory of compensation, right? That machinery might displace workers, but it also frees up capital.
Yes. The argument was that the capital previously used for wages would now be freed up and could be used to employ those same displaced workers in new industries, maybe making the machines themselves, or in other sectors. So it all balances out.
Like a natural compensation mechanism.
But Marx strongly refutes this. He says it's a fallacy.
Why?
Because the capital isn't just freed up in a way that it can immediately hire the same workers, it's transformed. Variable capital money for wages becomes constant capital money invested in the machinery itself, or raw materials.
So that money is now embodied in the machine, not available for wages.
Exactly. If a factory owner spends £1,500 on a machine that replaces 50 workers previously paid that £1,500 in wages, that capital is now locked up, as Marx puts it. It's ceased to be exchanged against labor power. It might eventually lead to growth elsewhere, but not as a direct automatic compensation for those specific displaced workers.
He used that Bill Sykes analogy.
Yes. Comparing the argument to the fictional thief Bill Sykes saying, sure, the traveler's throat was cut, but it wasn't my fault, it was the knife's fault.
Yeah.
Should we abolish knives?
The point being,
don't blame the machinery itself. Blame, from Marx's perspective, the capitalist application of the tool, how it's used within that specific system of production for surplus value.
okay, so we've seen the mechanisms, absolute and relative surplus value. Now let's really look at the human cost of this accumulation process, as described in the source. It's pretty grim.
It is. The text highlights the incredibly short lifespans of industrial workers due to the sheer intensity and conditions of labor, the rapid wearing out of labor power.
Are there statistics?
Yes, stark ones. Dr. Lee, a medical officer in Manchester, reported the average age at death for the upper middle class was 38. For the laboring class,
What was it?
17.
17 years old. Average age of death.
In Manchester at that time, yes. In Liverpool, it was reported as 35 for the upper classes versus 15 for the laborers.
15. That's barely past childhood. Living less than half as long.
It's shocking. And this high mortality rate, Marx argues, forces a rapid renewal of the generations of laborers. Early marriages became common, and because children could be put to work early, there was effectively a premium, as he puts it, that the exploitation of children sets on their production. Having more children could mean more potential income, however meager.
A grim cycle.
Yeah.
And the living conditions match the working conditions.
Absolutely. Official reports cited in Capital describe housing in industrial hubs like London and Newcastle as infernal. Huge colonies of people, tens of thousands living in miserable condition.
Getting worse over time.
Apparently so. One report notes the housing was much worse than was the case 20 years ago. Overcrowding was extreme.
And rents were going up?
Massively, making it impossible for many working families to afford more than a single room.
Just one room for a whole family.
Yes, and the text describes families being evicted due to demolitions for city improvements, railroads, new streets, and left literally wandering the streets on a Saturday night with their few belongings heading for the workhouse.
It paints a picture of incredible precarity. What about food? Nutrition?
Also dire. There's a startling comparison made in official inquiries from the time.
Comparing workers to
Convicts. It found that convicts in the convict prisons in England are much better fed than either the paupers in workhouses and of free laborers in the same country.
prisoners ate better than free workers.
According to these reports, yes. And the convicts were required to do only about half the work of an ordinary day laborer.
Is there a specific example of a worker's diet?
Yes, the book details the diet of an Irish agricultural worker, a beetler. He and his wife worked incredibly long hours for very low wages, about 15 shillings a week combined.
And what did they eat?
Often nothing before starting work at 6 a.m. Their main food was stirabout, a kind of porridge, sometimes oatmeal, sometimes cornmeal. Meat was described as very seldom. A nutrient comparison table included in the analysis showed agricultural laborers often had the lowest intake of essential nutrients compared to prisoners, sailors, soldiers, even skilled workers like coachmakers or compositors.
Just grinding poverty and deprivation. Yeah. And this wasn't only an urban phenomenon, right? Agriculture was also being transformed.
Massively. Marx discusses the expropriation of the agricultural population, the process of driving peasants off the land.
The clearing of estates.
Exactly. Landowners forcibly removing tenants, tearing down cottages, converting farmland into sheep pastures because wool became more profitable.
Creating homelessness in the countryside, too.
Yes, leading to terrible overcrowding in the remaining rural cottages. An example from Huntingdonshire mentions 10 people living in one room, measuring about 12 feet by 12 feet.
And where did these displaced rural people go?
They were forced into the towns and cities, becoming the basis for the new industrial working class, the proletariat, people with nothing to sell but their labor power.
And this process had another effect, didn't it? Creating a market.
A crucial one. It created a home market. These people who used to grow their own food, make their own clothes, now had to buy everything as commodities. They became consumers.
So the same process that created the workforce also created the market for the goods they would produce.
A dual effect, yes.
Now, this whole process, this primitive accumulation, as Marx calls it, it wasn't exactly peaceful or voluntary, was it?
Far from it. He stresses that direct force, state violence, played a critical role in the historic genesis of capitalist production.
Like those laws against vagabonds.
Yes, described as grotesquely terrible. Starting in the late 15th century and running through the 18th, there are laws across Europe imposing brutal punishments, flogging, branding, enslavement, even execution on people who were unemployed or homeless, essentially anyone driven off the land.
The goal being
to discipline them, to terrorize them into accepting wage labor under the new factory system, no matter how low the pay or harsh the conditions.
So the state wasn't neutral, it actively intervened.
Absolutely. Marx argues the state's role was crucial to regulate wages, meaning keep them low enough for profit-making, to legally sanction longer working days, and generally to keep the laborer himself in the normal degree of dependence.
It wasn't just about domestic laws either, was it? Primitive accumulation had a global dimension.
Oh, definitely. He includes the colonial system, public debts, heavy taxes, protection, commercial wars, all as methods used historically to amass capital.
And the slave trade.
Explicitly mentioned. The text cites how Liverpool waxed fat on the slave trade, how it provided vast employment for shipping and sailors, boosted demand for manufactured goods, and even stimulated the shift towards more brutal commercialized slavery in the Americas.
It's a deeply disturbing history.
It is, and it culminates in that incredibly famous, powerful line.
If money comes into the world with a congenital blood stain on one cheek, capital comes dripping from head to foot, from every pore with blood and dirt.
A stark summary of this historical process of primitive accumulation.
Wow. Okay. So we've really covered a lot of ground here, taking a deep dive into how these fundamental economic concepts, value, labor, money, were formed historically, according to Marx.
Yeah, tracing it from the twofold nature of commodities and labor.
Through the drive for surplus value, both by lengthening the workday and through machinery.
And looking squarely at the immense human cost involved in that process, the health impacts, the living conditions, the social upheaval, the role of force.
So thinking about all this,
yeah,
what stands out to you, the listener, from this deep dive?
Because these aren't just, dusty historical details. They offer a pretty powerful lens for looking at things today.
Like current debates about automation, wages, working hours, gig work.
Exactly. Or even global economic inequalities. Understanding these underlying mechanisms, or at least this analysis of them, helps you see past the surface level of economic news.
There's that quote near the end about the capitalist thinking he's just consuming surplus value while keeping his original capital intact.
But what he thinks cannot alter facts.
Right. So here's a final thought to leave you with. If, according to this analysis, the very foundation of wealth accumulation is rooted in a historical process that systematically extracted unpaid labor and often involved immense suffering and force.
But what does that imply about our continued pursuit of progress and prosperity today within systems that arguably evolved from that history?
And maybe What would it take to truly understand and perhaps even reshape these often invisible economic structures and relationships that Marx tried to expose? Something to think about.
Philozoopia.